I have spent a month trying to understand how the US, Britain, and France can justify our presence in Libya. Not only that, but how unrest could strike a series of nations simultaneously. Of course, there are social and economic issues that cannot be diminished, but the whole situation seems choreographed. Why Libya? Why Egypt? Why Syria? Why Yemen? And for that matter, why did we really go into Iraq? The neat, obvious answer is it's the oil, stupid. And it is oil, no question. But the evidence suggests a larger geopolitical motive, one that I believe will lead us directly to war with China and Russia. What follows is a timeline dating from 2001, which I believe illustrates the underlying danger of our position on Libya and Syria. In 2001, we were reporting on Saddam's secret oil. As reported here in August, Iraq is using oil riches and contracts to build political support and undermine UN sanctions. On Saddam Hussein's list of favored nations, Russia is in. And in this article, also from August, the major oil companies would love to put ready cash into developing massive oil fields, but few of those remain. Economic sanctions ban U.S. companies from some of the world's biggest oil states, such as Libya, Iraq, and Iran. In 2002, the Bush administration was concerned about Russia-Iraq oil ties. A convoy carrying Russian oil drilling equipment passed from Syria into Iraq. About 50 Russian specialists will arrive soon to begin setting up to drill 45 wells. For the Russian company Zarubezhneft, the big payoff would be Iraq's decision to grant the rights to develop the massive Bin Omar oil field, a multi-billion-dollar deal if the UN ever lifts sanctions. And in February of 2002, Russia, France, and China have contracts to develop major Iraqi oil fields. The Russian firm Lukoil has estimated that its long-term contract could be worth $20 billion. And in 2003, we know what happened. In 2004, the United States reaches an agreement with Libya. Gaddafi took formal responsibility for ordering the Lockerbie bombing and paid reparations. The U.S. eased economic sanctions and deepened diplomatic ties, and Prime Minister Tony Blair visited Gaddafi to lobby for oil drilling contracts armed with a lobbying letter drafted by Shell Oil. In April of 2004, it was reported that the U.S. is planning to ease restrictions to allow U.S. citizens to spend money in Libya, thus enabling American oil companies to negotiate deals in advance of the formal lifting of U.S. sanctions. So by July of 2004, Libya goes from pariah to belle of the oil ball. Many multinational oil companies previously enamored of Iraq have shifted their focus in the near term to Libya. The risks of entering Libya are relatively low in terms of politics and getting to the oil. Libya produces about 1.5 million barrels of oil a day, but would be able to double that in a decade. So the Libyan arms embargo was lifted in 2004. From 2004 to 2009, the European Union granted 835 million euros in arms sales to Libya. The primary sellers were Britain and Italy. In January of 2005, Russia and Syria signed 6 agreements on cooperation in different economic sectors. Russian oil company, I dare not try to pronounce it, and Syria's Oil and Natural Resources Ministry agreed to cooperate in oil and gas production and signed a contract on the construction of a pipeline producing plan. In August of 2005, Libya is anticipating being taken off of the U.S. terrorism list formally. And in December of 2005, China and OPEC start energy dialogue. And Russia and Syria announce that they are going to establish a $2.7 billion oil complex in Syria. Now in 2007, there are rumblings. The US and Russia have disagreements over Syria's influence in the Middle East. And an American-led panel of the Council on Foreign Relations expresses concern about China's involvement in the Middle East, saying one of the problems was the role of China in oil-rich countries and its attempts to lock up particular supplies for the Chinese market. In early 2008, as the U.S. economy was starting to melt down and oil prices were rising, OPEC snubbed a U.S. plea for extra oil to keep prices low. And Russia announced that they may base their Black Sea naval fleet in Syria. And at the same time, Gaddafi approaches Russia looking for an energy deal. As reported here in November, Russia is in a three-way race with Europe and the United States to secure lucrative contracts with Libya. In early 2009, Russia announces plans to establish naval bases in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And the Chinese are accused of an oil grab in Africa. The Chinese government is in a massive resource grab in Africa, which has huge ramifications for natural resource prices. China's latest foray is trying to buy 6 billion barrels of oil already spoken for via leases to Exxon, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, and Total SA. Sinopec, a Chinese oil company, approaches Libya looking for extra oil imports. 2010 is when it starts to heat up. In March, Libya warns the U.S. that it may favor rival oil firms. Libya is considering giving priority to Chinese and Russian firms over U.S. energy companies because of its diplomatic row with Washington. And at the same time, Chinese president vows to bolster ties with Arab states. China is involved in a big way in infrastructural development in Africa, where it is building roads, railways, harbors, hospitals, stadiums, and petrochemical installations. Libya, in May, says that they're going to strengthen cooperation with China on oil and development aids. And in November of 2010, China and Russia quit the US dollar. China and Russia have decided to renounce the US dollar and resort to using their own currencies for bilateral trade. And in November of 2010, the Russian media continues to report that Russia has plans for new bases in Libya and Yemen and to expand an old base in Syria. President Medvedev says, "I would make no secret of the fact that we have certain ideas on this theme, but I would not name them aloud for obvious reasons." In 2011, unrest explodes almost simultaneously in Egypt, Yemen, Libya, Syria, and neighboring countries. PetroChina parent Inpex joins Total SA to evacuate their Libyan staff. And as reported in the Tehran Times, the U.S. is provoking China and Russia in the Mediterranean, saying the United States is at risk of a war with China and Russia as its main objective behind engineering the Libyan war and Syrian unrest is to remove the two major powers from the Mediterranean. Last month, a British activist group said there is no evidence that Libya is using violence against protesters. And a couple of weeks ago, China urged an immediate end to the Libya conflict. And China and Russia have blocked an initiative by the U.S. and European allies for the UN Security Council to condemn Syria. And Beijing has just said that outside forces should not intervene in Syria. But the White House says the Libya mission is going to go on until Gaddafi stops. Now, we're already in an increasingly less polite trade and currency war with China. That is not new news. In December, foreign nations dumped a record amount of U.S. treasuries, the most worrisome being China, and China has recently said they're contemplating slashing their U.S. dollar holdings by 2/3, an extraordinary sum. So, as I like to close, I'm interested in what you think. Is it possible that the Iraq War and everything that has happened after has been a move to block China's and Russia's interests in the Middle East? And how long do you think they will tolerate U.S. imperialism, in their view at least, squashing their interests, and what are the ramifications?